Hi, everyone. Welcome back, and welcome to our new time for our Planetarium live streams. Um, I am Jessica. I am the Planetarium director, and with me, I've got two familiar faces that have been with me through almost all of these live streams. And I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with, we'll go with Eli, because he's currently to my left.
Hi, I'm Eli. I'm a physics and astronomy student at UMD.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a physics graduate student at UMD.
So, today we are going to be going into spaceflight, what it takes to actually go into space. And we wanted to do that today because this was the first attempt at launching the Crew Dragon spacecraft. There's so many names involved, which would have taken American astronauts launched from American soil up to the ISS for the first time in 9 years. Unfortunately, it did get scrubbed due to weather, but we still are going to stick with our plans and kind of talk about everything that it takes to get up into space, and then at the end, tell you when the next try is going to be. And as usual, if you have any questions throughout, put them down in the comments. We'll be checking that periodically. Anything we don't get to right away, we will take time at the end to answer any of those questions. And so I'm going to be turning it over to Eli, who's going to be talking with us. So Eli, take it away.
Okay, I'm gonna take just a second and make sure that I get the right video up. Okay, does that look good?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So this little presentation I put together obviously got a little jostled around at about 3:15 this afternoon because the trajectory, no pun intended, of this launch process changed quite a bit. But I did include just some information about what it actually takes to get people to space, because it's actually really an incredible process. So I figured naturally we'd start off with how astronauts prepare, and even before that, how astronauts are chosen, because it's actually quite an interesting application process, I think. So they go through a lot of really, really intense training, and these pictures I think are very funny, especially the one on the right, because they go through a lot of simulations that would prepare them for life in space and life in microgravity. But the application process is kind of, there's a few criteria that you have to meet. To be hired by NASA as an astronaut, you have to have United States citizenship. That's the first and foremost. You're not considered if you don't have citizenship here. But then after that, the individual must have, and I found conflicting information, but what it looked like is either a bachelor or a master's degree in a specific set of STEM fields, such as like biological sciences, physics, engineering, math, things like that. And the kind of gray area happened because you could substitute experience in the field for part of your degree. So if you were a bachelor's student, or you had your bachelor's degree, you could substitute 1,000 hours of experience as a jet pilot as that experience, or you could substitute progress through a master's degree or a doctoral degree as well, and then you would meet the criteria for acceptance. But then astronauts also have to exhibit a specific set of physical qualities uh, to be accepted. Some of those are, you have to have eyesight that is correctable to 20/20. So you don't have to have perfect 20/20, but they need to be able to give you some type of eyewear that can correct it to that. They need to have a heart rate below 140/90 while sitting. And they need to be between about 5'2" and 6'3". And I got excited because I do have two of those. I don't know what my heart rate is when I'm sitting because I don't have a machine to measure that at home. But I do know that I have vision correctable to 20/20 and a height between 5'2" and 6'3", so I might apply. But that could be a while because I don't think they're open for applications right now. The next thing I want to talk about is the kind of the training and the preparation after they get accepted. The astronauts spend anywhere from like 1.5 to almost 3 years training for the conditions they'll face in outer space. This often includes taking classes on like physics, medicine and first aid, survival, and this one actually surprised me, but it made total sense. They have to take language classes because when these astronauts go up to the International Space Station, they're very often interacting with Russian astronauts, and they need to be able to communicate with them. So they have to take language classes, learn how to speak basic Russian, and they also need to take classes on public speaking and presenting, because oftentimes they'll do a lot of press conferences, things like that, and they need to have a public image. So they have to take classes on kind of public relations too. But aside from that, they spend a lot of time doing hands-on training with some pretty interesting stuff. They interact with scale models of the machinery that they'll be working with. And they also work in things that simulate microgravity, like they experience in the ISS, like this water pool. This is called the, I don't have the name here, but it's a really large pool of water. The name was really long. Really large pool of water that gets down to 40 feet deep. And they put these like scale replicas of what they'll be working with in space down there, and they have to do mock missions. Something that was really staggering to me was that these training sessions underwater can last up to 7 hours, because that's how long the average spacewalk is. So when astronauts suit up and they leave the International Space Station to do maintenance outside of it or whatever, they often spend at least over 6 hours out there. So that was really staggering to me. That is a long time to be swimming and working on something. I can imagine that would be extremely tiring. And also nerve-wracking. I think 7 hours out in the vacuum of space would scare me quite a bit. The other thing I thought was really interesting that I'd seen before is training in something called the Vomit Comet, which is this plane right here, or this video that we'll watch. And it's a plane that flies up in such a manner and then drops that the people inside the plane experience 0 G's for 20 to 30 seconds, so they kind of get an understanding what zero gravity would feel like. And it's lovingly named the Vomit Comet because a lot of veteran astronauts don't particularly enjoy their experience on there, and they have that nickname for it. So Jessica, do you want to tell me if this video works when I started? I just want to make sure. Is the audio coming through?
I'm not hearing audio.
Well, it explains stuff on screen anyway. I think it should be okay. But I am getting audio. I'll see if I can fix that in the meantime.
Yeah, it's a Zoom setting. You have to tell the audio to go through Zoom.
Alrighty, give me just a second. Okay, for another video that I have down the line, Jessica, you might have to tell me how to enable that setting, because there is someone talking in it, but that's in a few slides. So let me get my presenter view up with my notes up. So yeah, these astronauts, and you can actually do this even if you're not an astronaut. You can pay for flights on these planes that do this. In fact, Stephen Hawking, the famous physicist, did this a couple of years ago. So you can pay to go on these trips and experience zero gravity yourself, but it is a little pricey. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000. So not the most cost-effective leisure activity, or not leisure, I suppose, that could be pretty daunting. But yeah, so now we'll talk about spacesuits, because that's another very important aspect of astronauts and how they survive out in space. So there are a lot of different types of spacesuits. And each type of spacesuit offers different benefits. The one on the left here is NASA's Extravehicular Mobility Unit, or EMU, which I thought was pretty funny. And it is designed to protect astronauts from the conditions of pure vacuum. So that's the type of spacesuit an astronaut would wear, for example, when doing a spacewalk and doing maintenance on the International Space Station. So there are a lot of parts that go into these spacesuits, and I kind of had to simplify it a little bit because from what I read, there are a lot of systems going on. But they offer life support functions like oxygen supply and like gas recycling, as well as a communication system, radiation protection, because when you're out in the vacuum of space and there's no atmosphere around you, the sun's radiation is coming at you very strongly, so you need to be protected against that radiation. And pressurization, so you aren't subject to the vacuum of space, and temperature control, and amongst other things. The suit is composed of 3 layers, and the first, and this is my personal favorite, the maximum absorbency garment, which is an adult diaper. And the astronauts have to wear that because, again, they'll be out in the spacewalk for at least 6 hours. So if they have to use the restroom in that time, they have the maximum absorbency garment, or MAG. And they also wear the thermal control undergarment, which is kind of a code name for long johns, which I also thought was pretty funny. So that's the first layer. After that, they don kind of this bodysuit called the liquid cooling and ventilation garment. It has tubes running along it. And these tubes serve 2 purposes. One of them has chilled water moving through it, and that controls the temperature in there. And then the other 2 tubes are for waste gas removal. So when you're breathing in there, you're converting the oxygen that's coming from your supply into gas that you don't want to breathe. You don't want to recycle that gas. So those tubes remove that gas, so you can breathe the oxygen coming through. And then after you put on the liquid cooling and ventilation garment, you put on the final, like the shell, and the shell's in 2 parts too, actually. The upper body part is hard, like it's like a shell, like a rigid shell, and then the bottom is kind of soft, flexible pants. So that's called the pressure suit. That is put on, locked up and pressurized. And then after that, the astronaut has to enter like a depressurized area of the ISS, and it's just to make sure that the suit is working well. It's all locked up, working correctly, and they can practice their breathing in there too. So that's the suit on the left for very extreme, going out actually into the vacuum. The suit on the right, which I love, is SpaceX's Starman suit. And this suit was designed in collaboration between Elon Musk, the CEO of SpaceX, and Jose Fernandez, who's a costume designer for a lot of Disney movies, specifically like The Avengers and Tron. So they designed it together, and then Elon Musk presented his engineers at SpaceX with it, and they reverse engineered it until they had a functional spacesuit. This spacesuit is not suited for spacewalks because there's not that much radiation protection. But it actually does offer a lot of amenities, specifically vacuum protection. So it would actually protect the astronaut from the vacuum of space, even though it doesn't look, like a rigid shell like the other one does. So it's kind of what the astronauts will wear, specifically the astronauts going up in Crew Dragon, what they'll wear in the capsule as they're traveling from Earth to the ISS. So just in case of an emergency, there is vacuum protection and life support, but they don't want to actually go out into the vacuum. So the next challenge is actually getting the astronauts into space. And this is quite an amazing process to me. I read this and I was really shocked. Actually, a 16-gallon tank of gas, that you get at the gas station, contains enough energy to get an astronaut into low Earth orbit. But in order to use that energy, the astronaut needs a rocket, and that rocket is going to weigh a lot more than the astronaut is. So once you get that rocket into the equation, you need a lot more fuel to push the rocket's weight. And when you add that fuel, you're going to need even more thruster power coming from the rocket to get it up. So you need more fuel and a bigger rocket. So this quickly compounds, and you go from having a car that uses the gas's energy to a rocket. And these rockets are absolutely massive. Luckily, we don't use kerosene to propel rockets anymore like we have in the past. We have much more efficient fuels, such as liquid hydrogen. But even still, these rockets need to be, obscenely large to bring, very, like, when you think about it, they're pretty small payloads compared to the size of the rocket. I remember reading that the Crew Dragon capsule is comparable in size to a Volkswagen Bug. So you need this whole big rocket system with boosters to get this Volkswagen Bug into space, or much like Elon Musk launched his Tesla into space. So it's quite the feat to get something up there. So seen on the slide to the left is SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket, which is the rocket that will be bringing Crew Dragon into space. And then on the right is kind of an artist's depiction of Crew Dragon and it coming close to the International Space Station. So that small capsule, like I said, that VW bug-sized capsule fits at the very top of the rocket in the nose cone, or just below the nose cone, and the rest of it is completely dedicated to fuel storage and combustion. So, like I said, it's quite the large machine once you have that much weight to push up there. So another thing that's really interesting is the actual process of a rocket launching. The rocket launch process only takes a few minutes before the rocket is in Earth's orbit, but it takes a long time for the capsule or the payload to get to where it's supposed to be in Earth's orbit, like a Crew Dragon will take to get to the ISS. So once the rocket actually takes off, in order to achieve maximum efficiency, the boosters will detach in stages when their mass is, no longer necessary. When you don't need that thrust anymore, they'll detach. And in SpaceX's case, they actually are guided and they will fall back. And the Falcon 9 will be caught by a drone ship out in the ocean. So they actually recover their rockets, which is very awesome. But after it launches, it takes about 10 minutes for everything to be completely detached and the capsule to be in orbit. But then as it was supposed to be today, and as it hopefully will be on Saturday, weather permitting, it will take almost 20 hours for the capsule to get where it's supposed to be. Because the International Space Station is traveling at 17,000 miles an hour. So you need to be really careful with these collisions and this docking, or else there's a lot of momentum going on up there. So collisions could be pretty intense. Speaking of the International Space Station traveling so fast, I thought it would be interesting to talk about why the International Space Station doesn't fall, because it's in Earth's gravitational influence, and we know that because it doesn't just fly off into space; it's orbiting, so it's being influenced by Earth's gravity. And the reason is because the International Space Station is traveling at the perfect speed, such that it kind of falls along with the gravity. So it just does not a perfect orbit. It has to adjust sometimes, but for the most part, it's a pretty calculated and synchronous orbit. So this at the top, that's the up the top of the right, that's the centrifugal acceleration. That's kind of this perceived acceleration pushing it outwards. And the gravitational acceleration is pushing it or pulling it inwards. And in order for the ISS to maintain its position, those two accelerations have to equal each other. And so in order for that to happen, the velocity that it's traveling horizontally compared to Earth needs to be equal to the square root of a constant, the gravitational constant, and then the mass of the Earth over the distance. So it's actually not that hard of a thing to calculate. And for the International Space Station, it is about 17,000 miles per hour, which is kind of a baffling speed to me. It's insanely fast. I remember I was watching some videos on it, and Elon Musk explained that is almost 25 times the speed of a bullet. So just to put that in perspective, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, another way to put that in perspective is it makes one orbit around the Earth every 90 minutes.
Yeah, that's insane to me. It's hard to believe. It's so crazy, but it's super interesting. And next, I wanted to talk about what astronauts do on the International Space Station, because astronauts are usually up there for about 6 months, and it can even go closer to almost 7.5. And while these astronauts are up there, they keep occupied by performing experiments that have been designed for space. The International Space Station is kind of at its core just a laboratory that satisfies the conditions of microgravity. It was put up there so that experiments that need microgravity could be performed, because we obviously can't do that on Earth. These astronauts, they are these scientists up there doing these experiments. But as well as being scientists, they're also technicians. They are receptionists. They're cooks. They are, like janitors. They really do everything up there. They cook the food. They do maintenance and upkeep on the International Space Station. They have some pretty interesting conditions to work with. They actually have to exercise a lot with high resistance equipment, because up in the microgravity, they have to exercise to simulate this resistance. Because on Earth, when even if you're just standing on the sidewalk, your legs are doing work to hold your body up against the force of gravity pulling you down. And without that, your muscles and bones would begin to deteriorate. So the astronauts have to work out up there with specialized equipment to reverse this process. And the pictures seen here on this slide, on the left, that is a German astronaut at the ISS doing an experiment with the Oculus Rift, which is a virtual reality gaming headset, to see how microgravity and kind of a lack of orientation affects your motor skills, and where you perceive objects to be and how your movement is affected. And then on the right, we have an astronaut working out, kind of doing what looks like a squat, but it's on a specialized squat rack to offer that resistance, since obviously there is none in the International Space Station. I thought that was really interesting. So Jessica, this is where I'm going to need to figure out how to get the audio working, because the next video I have is an astronaut, Chris Hadfield, explaining how they sleep on the International Space Station. So I'm in audio settings.
Lindsay, do you know?
No.
I just know you've gotten videos to work. I haven't done videos through Zoom.
I mean, we can definitely skip it. We're actually also kind of low on time. Maybe we could, link it to the live stream afterwards.
Yeah, we'll post it after.
So cool. I will provide you with that link. It's a really funny video. I actually find it really interesting. So now we have arrived at kind of the bittersweet part of today's live stream, and this is talking about the Crew Dragon launch and what happened today. So the final preparations, and very final preparations for this launch began this afternoon, just before 11, and it kind of started with the final alignment of the rocket, making sure that everything was in place, and that the capsule was secured. And then as this was going on, kind of a historic event was happening, actually. The astronauts were handed off by NASA to SpaceX, and this has never really happened before, because this is the first time that astronauts have been launched by a private company. Before this, it was NASA that was launching them into space, but NASA hired SpaceX to make a rocket and a capsule to bring them up. So this is kind of the first time that responsibility was handed over, and that's kind of an interesting thing, I think, and maybe a precedent for space flight in the future. Not even maybe, I think definitely a precedent. But at this point, once they were handed over, the crew suited up into their Starman spacesuits, which are very awesome. And they traveled to the launch pad, which is Complex 39A. And at about 1 p.m., the astronauts entered the Crew Dragon capsule at the nose of the rocket. After about 2 hours of fueling and adjustments and system checks, the launch was canceled. I would say it was just about 15 minutes before launch was scheduled. And it was due to inclement weather. And so as of now, the next attempted launch will be Saturday at 2:33 p.m. And that's our time. That's Central
2:22.
And 2:22?
Yeah, that's what I saw on NASA's website.
Okay. So 2:22 rather. And if not, then it'll be Sunday at around 2 p.m. And I know Jessica has more on why the launches have to be at a certain time, because I remember during the live stream they said that if we could have waited 10 or 15 minutes, the launch could have happened because the weather conditions would have cleared up. But that's not how it works for these types of things, because it needs to launch at a specific time to reach the destination. So stop screen sharing.
Yeah. So before I get into that real quick, this is a good time if you do have any questions to put them down in the comments for us to be able to answer. But I know that there was, at least when I was watching the stream, a lot of the comments were questioning, why there was such a rigid timetable, why they couldn't just wait a little bit. And that comes back to how fast the International Space Station is moving. I mean, as we said, it's, moving, 17,000 miles per hour? So
yeah, I think just over that.
Yeah, even if they launch a couple minutes later, it's moved so far away that they don't have enough fuel to get to it in time. And so when going to the ISS, there has to be a very rigid timetable just due to how fast it's moving. And unfortunately, the weather just didn't cooperate. And on that point, it's not even the weather itself that was necessarily bad, though one of the big things that caused the mission to be scrubbed was the potential for lightning. Not even that there was lightning in the area, but based off of conditions in the atmosphere, there was high potential for lightning to possibly happen. And when you still have a stage of fuel to put in, you definitely don't want lightning going off. You also don't want it when the spacecraft is taking off, just due to all the electrical systems, anything that could happen. And so that was a big part of what caused the mission to be scrubbed, unfortunately. But again, trying to get on Saturday. We will be sure to share that live stream on our page. I think coverage is going to start around 10 a.m. As they start getting ready and get in and start doing all of their pre-flight checks. And then launch is, I thought it was 2:22. I may be wrong. I may have read that wrong. But it's...
Yeah, I'll check that, because I thought I saw 2:33 somewhere, but I could totally have been wrong.
Yeah. So yeah, that's gonna be coming up, and it's exciting and a big deal. We haven't had American astronauts launch on American rockets from American soil in 9 years, almost 10 years. And so this is a big part of getting our space exploration back up and running. Because we've done a lot of, robotic probes and spacecrafts going out, but actually getting the human exploration back out. But one of the things that I heard them talking about in the stream today that I thought was something that I hadn't thought about is by having a commercial business, someone other than the government, run this, they can take more risks than a government agency can. They can make the decision to purposefully crash a rocket to see what happens and see what's going on, something that a government agency may not be able to do because they're so strict on what money they get and how they can use that money. And so that's allowed SpaceX to make advancements that NASA was never able to make because of those lack of restrictions. And that's allowed for them to come up with systems like the returning rocket, so that you can use these systems, I'm really blanking on words tonight, guys. Pieces of equipment, I guess, reuse them, which also brings down the cost of what it takes to send people to space. Because when you're not having to build an entirely new rocket every time you launch, costs are going to go down, which makes it more affordable to send scientists and astronauts, and potentially not too far off, send you or me. Well, not me. I'm not going. But send someone else up into space. So there's a lot. There's a lot going on that's needs to be celebrated. And I think one of the things that really got to me is watching some of the coverage they had of just videos and things coming in from kids who are so excited for this. I mean, this is igniting that kind of passion in future generations, and we really need that. And so, yeah, there's a lot. It's exciting. I'm very excited for it, and hopefully Saturday's mission, we will be go for launch and won't have the weather getting in our way. But of course, it's always a good call to err on the side of safety. So yeah, that's my little spiel, I guess, that I wasn't planning on doing. um, and I don't see any questions coming in. So again, if you have any, put them in. We'll get to them. And I guess the last thing we can do real quick while we wait for any last minute questions is tell you about our schedule coming up. So on Saturday, we're going to be doing a show on aliens and life elsewhere. I'm really excited for that one. I'm putting that one together. It's something I love talking about and a show that I've been wanting to build for the Planetarium for a while anyway. Next week, since we will officially be in June, we'll be doing our monthly update of Stargazing Tonight on what you can find up in the sky in the month of June with possibly a special guest. We'll see. I will let you know on our Facebook page if that happens. And then next Saturday, we're going to take you on an adventure through the universe and just some of the really cool things that you can find out there. So yeah, I'm not seeing any comments or any questions. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. Unless either of you have anything else to add or say.
It's 2:22. You're right. 2:22 on Saturday.
And again, we will make sure to share NASA's live stream once it's up and running on Saturday morning. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us at our new time. Hopefully this works well for people. And we will see you next time. Have a great evening and great rest of your week. Bye.